Hello everyone. So in today's session, we're going to see how you add a client and a server to the domain which we have created in the previous lesson. Okay, so I've in total 3 machines here. One is a server. Okay, so let me check my machine name. Either I can go to the server manager or I can go to the properties. Okay, see, this is in a work group. Okay, let me see the IP address. Config. Okay, it's 192.168.0.2. This is the server which I want to add to the domain. And after adding to the domain, this will be a member server. I've already a pre-configured domain controller which I've created in the previous lesson. And plus I've installed, there's a fresh installation of a Windows 10 client machine. So let me check the properties for this. Oh, okay. So it's also in the work group. So first of all, let me change its machine name. Okay, I rename it as client 1. Okay, I click OK. Okay, it has to go for a restart. And before going for a restart, let me see if I've configured the IP address. Okay, so it's 192.168.0.3. So my domain controller's IP address is 192.168.0.1. This server, the mail server IP address is 192.168.0.2, and the client machine's IP address is 192.168.0.3. Both, our objective is to add both these client and server machine to the domain controller. Okay, so first of all, let the client go for a reboot. Okay, now I'll go to the domain controller. So in the previous lesson, we have configured the domain controller anydomain.com, and we'll go to the tools, and now you'll see the difference between a normal server and a domain controller. Because before we configure the server as the domain controller, if you go to the tools in server manager, your server manager appears like this. What is the difference? There is no Active Directory tools or Active Directory users computers. There's no Active Directory modules in a normal server. Whereas in a domain controller, you can see the different Active Directory components. Okay. So you'll see Active Directory Administrative Center, which is the new interface for you to create a user. As of Server 2012, Microsoft has upgraded their user interface. The old interface was something like this. Okay, users, where you create a users. Now they have come up with another interface which is called Active Directory Administrative Center, ADAC, whereas the older one was ADUC, Active Directory Users and Computers. So in Active Directory Administrative Center, or ADAC, you can easily create a user. For example, if you want to reset a password, you have a very handy interface here. Or if you want to create a new user, again, you can see different containers here, users, and if you go to new, click new here, click user. Okay, first name Tony, let's say Jack, and okay, I give tony.jack@anydomain.com. I give the passwords. Okay, User must change password at the next logon. Okay. If you want to give more details here, you have the option here and you click OK. Yes, and the new user Tony Jack is created. Whereas if you go to the old version Adak, how do you create a user? You go to user, either you click here or you right click, you go to new user and you give the name Amy, last name is John, amy.john@anydomain.com. User must change password at the next logon, and I click next, finish. So there are different ways of creating a user, and especially with Server 2012 operating system, Microsoft have brought in the concept of Adak, maybe an alternative method to Adak, which is Active Directory users and computers. So this is a separate session which I'll go over at a later time. That will be a separate session of how you manage Active Directory objects. So today's objective is to add our server and a client to the domain. So let me go to the local server. I click here and I change. My domain is anydomain.com. I give the administrator credentials. Okay, click OK, close, restart. Now let me go to the client. I have to log in. Okay. Before configuring, let me see if the administrator administrative account is enabled. Okay, so by default, when you configure a client or when you install a client operating system, the administrator account will be disabled. So depending on the best practices in your environment or the security best practices or security policies that you have, if you want to enable this administrator account, you can right click, go to properties, you uncheck account is disabled, and then apply, OK, and then you set a password as well. Okay, so now I wanna join this to the domain. Okay, I go to change settings, same method, you change, you add your domain, anydomain.com is my domain, click OK, anydomain/administrator password, click OK. If the credentials entered is OK, the connection will be fine and your machine will be added, but before that you need to go for a restart. Now, before trying to add your machine to the domain, you should ensure that your machine has a connection to the domain controller. For example, the IP address of my client machine is 192.168.0.3 and I need to ensure that this 192.168.0.3 is able to communicate with 0.1, which is my domain controller. Yes. Also, I can just try pinging anydomain.com to see if the DNS is working properly. Okay, the IP to domain addresses are being resolved. If you still get a reply, which means you have a good connection with your domain and there's no issue with your DNS servers. So this can be done before you. Right now I have demonstrated after adding my after doing the procedures of adding my PC to the domain controller, but you can do this well before to check whether everything is okay, and then you can start the procedures for adding your PC or a server to the client. Similar way, if I go to my mail server, okay, so now that this is added to the domain, as you can see, sign into any domain. Earlier, when this was a local machine, you won't get this prompt like sign into any domain. You will just get this login only, or maybe some other local users which you have pre-created. But now I have the option to log into this member server. Now this is a member server and not a local server. Member server with the any domain credentials. Maybe I can log in using administrator of any domain. Yes, and I'm able to do that. So first of all, let my client go for a reboot. So what I was trying to say is, before actually you do the procedures for adding your server to the domain controller, same procedures, try a ping to your domain. So you get a reply, which means your DNS is working properly. Okay, you have a good connection with your domain controller, and then you start adding. So sorry that I missed that step to show that step well before. And now if I go to my Active Directory ADAC, how do I go? In Server Manager, I go to Tools, I go to ADAC, and I go to Computers. I can see 2 machines joined here. You will see these machines only after you successfully add the client and the server to the domain controller or to the domain. And also, if you click on domain controllers, you can see that DC01 is the one and only domain controller that you have. So right now, this is your primary domain controller. It is always recommended that you use a minimum of 2 domain controllers depending on the size of your company in a network, so that one will function as a primary domain controller and another will function as a backup domain controller or an alternate domain controller. Okay, so in the next videos I'll be coming up with how you manage Active Directory objects, okay, and also a detailed video on how to use this ADAC and ADAC. If I go to ADAC, Active Directory Administrative Center, and I go to click on my domain, any domain, and if I click Computers, I see the same information here again. If I go to domain controllers, again it lists my domain controller in this container. Okay, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching.